poll, please.
Councilmember Agajanian,
Present.
Devine,
Here.
Garpetian,
Here.
Najarian,
Here.
Mayor Sinanian.
Here. May we have the report, please?
The agenda for the March 26, 2019 special public meeting of the City Council was posted on Friday, March 22nd, 2019 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
What is next on the agenda?
1, Director of Community Development regarding design review streamlining. 1A, motion directing staff regarding recommendations to improve and streamline the design review process.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, will go directly to Bradley Calvert, our Assistant Director of Community Development, to take you through the presentation that we have that will talk about Phase 1 that has already been implemented and talk to you about some recommendations regarding Phase 2, which is focused on the design review piece process. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and council members. We'll wait just a second here to pull up the slide, but today we wanted to come to you with a series of improvements to the design review process. Several years back, we made some improvements to the permit streamlining, which we've seen positive results from, and we'd like to continue that as we look at the design review process. Just a quick overview. We'll give some summary conclusion based on what happened with our permit streamlining with the first phase. The recommended improvements to the current design review process, which includes reviewing our attendance policy for design review board members, looking at the possibility of alternates for the design review board, improvements to application consistency, improvements to review consistency, and then also the consideration of design standards and guidebooks as a long-term option. And then ultimately there would be one action item this afternoon, and that would be what would council's preference be to move forward with an alternate design review board member composition. So in Phase 1, we eliminated CUPs in a couple zones, and what it ultimately did is it eliminated planning hearing officer meetings. And that was important for us because it took away a step. There's a lot of other elements that go into that step, including noticing, reports, and that allowed our staff members to focus more on design review and send those projects directly to design review. We also made modifications to the administrative exceptions threshold, which reduced similarly several months, 1 to 2 months off of that, because it essentially took a step out there. It avoided the variance process, the public noticing that goes along with that. We also applied the director's authority for parking exceptions, which reduced that average time from 75 days to 50 days. And ultimately what all of these did is allowed our staff members to focus more on design review permits, other permit applications as well. As part of this second phase, we want to focus on how we can improve that design review process. There are several elements that go into that. Pre-application process is one of those. That's essentially a free service that we offer to applicants to give them early guidance on their project prior to their formal submittal. But right now that's not a formalized process either, and it essentially has an indefinite period of time, which leads to a lot of exchanges back and forth, some lost in translation elements in terms of feedback from staff to applicants, and it really becomes a time-consuming element. The application submittal process itself, this is where the actual review clock begins. This is when an applicant has submitted, they've paid their fee. What we've also found there is we have some inconsistent information coming in, and a lot of that goes back to needing to address standards of submittal applications. We have the staff review process. That includes reviewing the actual project for compliance with our zoning code. That includes writing the staff report. And then there's the design review board itself, which includes noticing and scheduling of that meeting. Currently, we're about 5 months from the time of submittal to being in front of the design review board. We have seen some challenges in there as well, though, maintaining quorum or attendance from board members, which can also lead to inconsistencies. A thing I would note here is that when we use the word consistent, it should be synonymous with streamline. The more consistent we can make things, the more likely that our applicants, they know what to expect, they know what to predict. It minimizes the back and forth. It allows them to get through the process into design review board faster. So in an ideal situation, an application would take 120 days from submittal to arriving at design review board. And some of that, right now, we're averaging about 157 days. So we're slightly above, but 150 days is still a good target to have. There are always a number of things in there that are unpredictable. An application will not always come in perfect. That 120 days is assuming someone came in with the perfect information right off the bat and we're able to move that along. But there's usually changes that need to be made. There's more information that needs to be requested. So that little light blue line in the center of this kind of diagram to represent the timeline represents that additional time it may take to ask for more information, which pushes us out to that 150 days. And as Ed mentioned before, some other challenges that do turn up as part of this process are the board member attendance, the consistency in those applications, consistency in how staff or how the design review board reviews projects. There's also become an expectation from some applicants that staff designs the project on their behalf as part of the pre-application process, or comes up with design solutions for them, essentially, which eats into that time for staff to review other projects. And then also looking at our standards. One thing we learned in the design review process, or in the downtown specific plan process, is that we were lacking some teeth. We see this a lot in appeals. We see it in a lot of design review board meetings. What does compatibility mean? And how do we start to put a definition around some of those things? But that timeline can grow. Again, if someone asks for, or if we have to ask for more information because we're missing some as part of the application, if there needs to be some changes made to comply with our zoning code, that just starts to add more time. And in some cases, the pre-application process itself can take as much time and or longer. And that's a bit of a challenge for us because that creates the perception that our review process as a whole is much longer than it actually is. Again, this pre-application process is a service that we offer to applicants in order to help guide them in the early stages before submitting. And in some cases, if a project has to go before the design review board a second time, if they had to go back for a redesign, that also adds time. So the elements that we're proposing here today are to try to minimize these opportunities to add more time in, to build more time into that review process, and again, bring greater consistency. More consistency we have, the more streamlined, the more expected that timeline can be. It becomes predictable for applicants. So the first portion we were looking at was the design review board and attendance. Currently, there is a requirement for 75% of all meetings. A board member cannot miss more than 3 consecutive meetings. Now, we have had some challenges with that attendance, and what we're proposing is that we notice the current design review board of the current policy and begin to monitor it much closely and enforce it when need be. Another is the appointment of alternate members for the design review board. Again, when board members miss a meeting, that becomes a challenge for us to maintain a quorum. If we have to postpone a project, that has a cascading effect on all other projects that are queued up to go before the design review board. That pushes them back 2 weeks, maybe a month. It all depends on what that calendar looks like. In 2017, we had board members miss 10 total meetings. In 2018, it went up to 33. And that is not just about maintaining quorum. We actually had, canceled meetings in 2017 and 2018 were identical. We had to cancel 2 because of lack of quorum. But there's also a consistency issue. If the board members are not consistently present, our standards, our guidelines are not being consistently applied either. So making sure that the board members are in attendance as much as possible, but having alternates there to fill their place as well. And we can do that in 2 ways. The first is we could have an alternate for each of the existing design review board members. Essentially, the council member appoints an additional board member for each position. That does propose or present some challenges. Managing a group that large, ensuring their participation can become a challenge. If one board member or one alternate is dependent on one board member to fill in, if that board member consistently is attending meetings, then the alternate may not get to participate. Therefore, it becomes a disincentive to become part of the design review board. If we were to limit that to, say, 2 or 3 alternate board members, that gives them an opportunity to alternate within the existing 5 whenever someone is absent. It also ensures that their participation maintains. And we can also ask for them to attend all meetings so that they remain actively engaged, especially early on, to get them familiar with the process and the application of our standards and land use policies. As mentioned before, the pre-application process, while this is not the formal time of submittal, the clock has not started yet, it is a large consumer of time for our staff members. And that's because the process isn't formalized. And because of that, that creates negative perceptions within the public. They assume, while an architect may know that when they submit the application, that's when the clock starts, the homeowner may not. They think that this back and forth with staff is all part of the review process. And that sets essentially a bad perception with the public with our process there. What it also does is encourages low-quality submittals. It becomes this informal exchange back and forth between our staff members and with the applicant. Emails, phone calls, lack of comprehensive guidance, if you will, a sort of one-time shot, comprehensive review of their project. Instead, it becomes this back and forth where things become lost. Or as you move through the process, more and more things become asked for, and then that also leads to inconsistency in review of projects. And it's also led to the expectation that staff resolve some of the design challenges for them. Obviously, we know the code, we enforce it, and they are continuously coming back to us seeking that guidance to resolve some of those challenges. So what we're proposing is to formalize that pre-application process. Rather than letting it run this indefinite period of time, is that we require this prior to any decision-making process before submitting an application. It's a one-time conference where the applicant has a certain set of standards that they have to bring forth for us to be able to review the project in the early stages. And then we offer them this conference and give them a full comprehensive feedback before their submittal. Guidance and direction for what they need. Rather than this continuous one-time exchange here, one-time exchange there, kind of back and forth that we've been seeing, one time they get a formal documented letter so that they know how to move forward for a successful application and submittal. And at that submittal, the expectation would be the applicant responds to that letter as well. That in their submittal packet, they demonstrate how they've satisfied those concerns that were raised during the pre-application process. That those are included as part of their submittal package, their drawings. There's still some work to be done in terms of defining what the checklist may be, but that they answer those specifically. And this is an example of from another city in their design review process. On their on their actual submittal, they had to address all of the concerns that were raised at the first meeting. And they have to demonstrate that in essentially a single image or a collection of images before their official kind of submittal documents. This prefaces all that. Another challenge, as mentioned before, is the consistency of the submittal packets themselves. We believe that the pre-application process and formalizing that and giving better guidance early on will lead to improved submittal packages, but we also think there could be some work involved there in terms of updating the checklist so that we would consider this based on the different permit type, the different project type. Not every project would submit the exact same packet. A house addition versus a new house are not the same thing. But standardizing these and making sure that the information that we need to successfully do our review is presented up front and early, rather than a packet that's just rushed to submittal and then we don't have all the information we need and it becomes that back and forth exchange trying to extract that. And where we'd like to begin with this is with the DSP pending tonight's outcome. We would like to be able to create that new checklist since we do have new standards. This is a great opportunity for us to test that concept with the DSP and then start to apply that to other project types as well. This was an example from a submittal, this early project here. This graphic does not provide us a lot of information. We're missing a lot of information for us to be able to do a thorough review of a project. And ultimately, on their first submittal, they were deemed incomplete. When they came back, this is what we received. And this is more like what we need to see the first time around. Not the aesthetic quality. We don't need this to be colored. We don't need certain details. But we need enough to know here what this design actually is. These two projects are very, very different. And the window of time of submittal was very short between the two. And that's because that first one was rushed in versus the second one, which was well thought out and provided us the information that we needed. Everything here is it's different in how we measure the building height and everything.
Quick question?
Yes.
This is a project in DSP?
No, this is a multi-family project.
Multi-family
I'd have to
project.
check on the actual address.
Is this the Los Feliz project?
I'd have to check on which one it actually is. But
This is not a like average design review board projects that we get, like single-family homes, 10 units, 20 units, stuff like that, right?
correct.
Okay.
And the same principles would be applied to single family. Granted, they may not need to show as much information because obviously that's a smaller structure. We would tailor that checklist and those requirements based on that permit. Not everybody would have to come in with the exact same thing. And just a sample checklist of the kind of information we would be looking for. A series of drawings, each drawing being able to tell the story that we needed to tell in order for us to be able to do the review accurately. Another thing that we would like to look at, especially with larger projects or just brand new projects, is the provision of a massing model. Pasadena currently requires this. We do have an existing city model already in our files. This gives us an opportunity to review projects in their context. We talk about compatibility when it comes to massing and whatnot. This is a chance for us to be able to see that massing in its context. And it allows our staff to objectively review that, not just on the static images that are provided to our applicant. This has become a very common practice across most cities, mainly because these tools to create these 3D models have become efficient and expensive, and it's just become the industry standard at this point, especially for a new building.
So an actual model of the project?
It would be a 3D digital model that would be put into the context of the city. Correct. Okay. So we have a city model. You may recall from some of the DSP, we use that to drop in some massings. We have some of other neighborhoods. We can finish building out the rest of it and then be able to plug this model in so that we get a chance to see the context of that.
Because I've been asking for these larger projects to have an actual model, to bring it to, so you can see the relationship between that building with the future relationship between that building and the neighboring properties, as well as having a bigger scale plans that we get, site plans, elevations, when we want to have a design review process, or we want to look at make a decision on a design, have something that it's a little larger than 8.5 by 11, and they have two elevations on one page. So I think that's a good direction. This is the right direction that we're going to.
And on larger projects, we could still ask for the physical model. The one thing that's nice about the digital is that if we already have this existing one, we can put that in the context. We can move it around. We can see what that relationship is to the surrounding environment rather than being dependent on just the images they happen to give us. And that's why we'd like to ask for that for new projects. Smaller projects, obviously, that would not be applicable.
I don't mean to bring up a sore spot, thank you, Mr. Mayor, but we had a digital for the Carmel project, didn't we? Where it was shown what it looked like actually in the neighborhood, and they had the whole plan or the building.
We had their static images that they produce from their model.
Okay, that's not the same as this?
This here, so I'll try to explain this as well as I can in terms of how an architect may use it, but there's a software tool called SketchUp that most use pretty frequently. There's also a free online portal. We can take our model, put it into that portal. They give us their digital file, and we're not asking necessarily for it to be as detailed as that top level. We just want to know the massing. And we can put it into that model, and then our planner could move around that and be able to see it from all the different vantage points. And that's important because then we can see the context as it is, not the way they happen to show it to us every time. Allows us to more objectively review that.
One more question, I'm sorry. So the system that we have, can we see the same thing here when it comes to, for the project to be approved or to the design to be reviewed?
The 3D model.
Same way that the planner can move it around and see the building in that neighborhood. When you present it here, what do we see?
We could make that part of it.
We don't see. We see only smaller, flat renderings of. You don't see it even in a 3D or a perspective of it. So, is it something that we can maybe see it here as well? The same system can be. I think that's something that I would like to.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it can be done with, you can either have the software as a standalone license on a computer, or there's a web portal now that you can view it in. They created basically an open source form of it to be used. And really, we want to, and as similar to what you're saying, we want to be able to see that in its context, to be able to demonstrate it, and not just from that perspective. But it can definitely be used at council.
Okay.
And design review boards as well.
Thank you.
Right, and surely it's got to be cheaper than to prepare a charrette or a maquette, whatever they call those things.
Correct. And it's really become kind of standard practice at this point to be able to show your clients what you're showing. This isn't asking for anything above and beyond what most architects would provide in a new building case. Again, we wouldn't ask for this if someone was replacing windows, if it was a small addition. Maintaining consistency in design review board review itself is important and essential. We've heard feedback that maybe this project heard one thing and another project heard another at the review board. And that's to be expected. There's gaps between projects, there's gaps between style of projects. The board members aren't going to carry their notes from one project to the next in review, but we can do things to make sure that they stay within essentially a certain purview, the things that are priorities, the things that matter most for that design review process. And this goes back to creating essentially another checklist. And this would be something that the design review board and even staff could use while reviewing a project. And their comments need to stay within essentially that swim lane. We identify what priorities are, we break them down by scale and priority, and then they provide feedback provided that it's within that realm, so that we don't have these conversations where we bleed outside of our purview or we start asking for more things than we need to. And that also applies to the design review board, hopefully with the intention of reducing those numbers of redesign asks as well. And we also want to look at the existing code. Are there projects, are there thresholds essentially, square footage thresholds, things of that nature that we could modify on projects that are not as impactful on the neighborhood? And we can exempt them from design review board and handle that administratively. We haven't identified all of those yet. That's something, and I'll mention this towards the end as well, is that all of these kind of have a short-term, midterm, and long-term plan. This is one of the longer-term ones, is we need to go back, take a look what those thresholds are, and then actually change the code potentially. But this goes back to similar to what we did on phase one. Some of these things could change so that we can essentially offer a release valve to staff so they can focus on to other things rather than having to carry this through to design review board.
But isn't that the review process the same for design review board and staff level review?
It would take out some of the noticing process, the scheduling of the design review board, that extra time that comes from there. That's what we would be
How about
removing.
the staff report? Is it the same as design review for staff review?
Depends on the scale of the project, the type of permit. You know,
Single family house.
Well, that would go before design review board for a single family home.
So which projects are you referring to that will go to the staff for review?
They may be certain additions, things of that nature. We've glanced at them. We haven't created a definitive list, and that's something we would come back to council with before making a move on that to determine if that was something council wished to change.
Okay.
Another thing is we learned from the downtown specific plan process is creating standards and guidelines that are measurable, that they have a clear definition behind them. This is something that we heard during that process. We've also seen it through appeal process and design review boards. We grapple with that definition of compatibility. And what we would like to be able to do is create more standards and less guidelines and look at that from a neighborhood perspective or a collection of neighborhoods if they have a matching aesthetic quality to them. Essentially developing a template and creating these standards by districts or collections of districts. An example here, an architectural pattern book, you can see on the right side, they create these simple principles behind certain design styles. In this case, they have classical, modern, Victorian, and arts and craft. These are all things that we could apply to the styles that exist here, particularly if there's one that's more prevalent in a neighborhood than another. Essentially giving them their own opportunity at standards and guidelines, but giving us a chance to define what compatibility is and something that's measurable when we see a project come in. A good example is the Louisiana Speaks pattern book. This was developed following Hurricane Katrina. There's a lot of new projects were coming in the door that weren't compatible with what they were used to. So they created these standards where it dealt with essentially the 5 major components that they perceived as important to their design and their aesthetic quality of their neighborhoods, including massing, doors, windows, porches, but creating those based on that typology or that style of architecture, so that when new buildings come in, even if they're modern, they're able to still be compatible and speak to those existing projects. Some other improvements that we would like to make, some of these are a little less public-facing, public-forward, is more cross-training with staff. Right now, we have developed a plan to put staff members in pairs. We have identified subjects and topics that tend to be of difficult or challenge sometimes, and we want them to create essentially documents that give us a reference manual for other staff to use. They become subject matters, and maybe it's window styles, or maybe it's affordable housing, whatever we apply to that review process. And then they create on their own as a collective, essentially a guidebook for everyone. The goal in this is so that they're not dependent on just senior staff to answer some of these questions. They've created this resource after working with senior staff that they can go to, and they can go to one another to answer some of these questions. In the event that if Jay or Eric or someone else is out of town, they're not waiting to get that answer. They have that resource right there in front of them. Also looking at training and equipping them with the software that they need, as I mentioned before, that web portal to be able to view 3D massings and 3D models. Consider converting existing and future AUP and CUP approvals to have no expiration, focusing more on enforcement rather than the time consuming of those continuously coming back and re-upping. And look at when they do violate, we can consider revoking their AUP or CUP. And something that came up, and this could be an element if council wishes to discuss it, is should downtown projects go before the design review board? That's come up as a conversation piece in prior DSP discussions. It's come up from the public as well. So that timeline and kind of that typical scenario with that extended pre-application process, if we formalize that, we're able to remove that extended period of time leading up to the project. We're able to condense that, give them comprehensive feedback, comprehensive information to prepare them for their submittal package. If we improve that submittal package, we have less opportunities where we have to go back and ask for more information. They give it to us all up front. We ask for a little bit more work up front. We help them out on the back end by being able to compress that time in which they go for their review. If we're able to increase staff expertise, we reduce delays or opportunities where they need to ask senior level staff for guidance. So we take that time out as well. And if we improve the DRB and we follow through with these checklists and we follow through with these review processes, we eliminate those chances of design review board meetings getting pushed back, delayed, canceled, or having to go back for redesign. And then we ensure that all of our projects are able to fall within that 120 to 150 day window that we would like to see them all in. So a timeline, the near term, we could move on noticing the design review board on the attendance policies, and we could appoint alternates immediately. In the midterm, updating those submittal requirements and standards and update of the distribution and review checklist for the design review board is something that we see happening in the midterm. We have already appointed staff to work on that, and they've begun the process of examining how we can formalize that pre-application process, improve checklists. And the longer term, and we say longer term, that's something that we would anticipate starting by the end of this year, would be to update some of those land use code elements where the threshold could be changed, where maybe some of these projects don't need to go before the design review board. They could be handled administratively. And then also looking at developing those standards and guidelines based on typology or district.
Question, please.
When you say thresholds can be changed, are you talking about the types of projects that instead of going to design review board can go to staff for review, or the threshold is the square footage or the setbacks or the type of a project or the standards of the let's say single family residential neighborhood?
The latter, square footage. So maybe that threshold could be changed from 500 square feet to 750, whatever that case may be.
So right now it's 200 square feet in the front. If it's more over 200 square feet, goes to design review board. If the rear development, if the development is or addition is in the back of the house, it's over 700 square feet, it goes to design review board. So those are the thresholds that you're referring to, that if it's 300 square feet in the front, doesn't have to go to design review board. Staff can take care of it.
Those are the kind of thresholds we want to look at, correct,
Thank
yeah. So in summary, what we would like to be able to do is keep that DRB on schedule, keep them consistent in their review process, formalizing that pre-application process so that we get useful and comprehensive feedback back to our applicants so that they come in with a complete and ready to be reviewed package. Eliminate that informal back and forth where that confusion starts to come up because you've been exchanging emails and phone calls and sketches back and forth. Overall, just elevating that consistency and quality of the submittal packages themselves, creating objective and measurable criteria similar to what we've established as part of that DSP. What does compatibility mean? How do you measure some of these standards? And then enhance overall staff expertise. Give them more confidence in their decision making. Make them into subject matter experts for some of these difficult elements so that they don't have to go back to that senior staff to resolve those issues. So the action item from this is if council wishes to proceed with appointing alternate design review board members, is there a preferred composition, and how would we like to do that? The first one, again, appointing 5 alternates, 1 for each of the existing board members, or we could produce a reduced number, and there's several ways that we could go about that. That could be a rotation schedule with the city council. City manager's office themselves could also nominate and council votes, but we'll leave that open for discussion with council. Otherwise, if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Okay, thank you very much. Question, Mr. Arjanian?
Just about this action item where it says to have two design review board or one design review board and with one alternate per existing board member, or option to maximum of two alternates for the entire design review board. So what we had before was two members of city council. They were picking up the person to be on the design review board, right?
I believe so, correct? Yeah.
Right?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. So if we're gonna use maximum of two alternates for the entire design review board, will be part, I mean, the reason they changed that to make every council member responsible for the person who's sitting on the design review board. That was the thinking a while ago. I don't know how many years ago. I don't know, maybe 10 years ago?
Yes,
10 years ago.
approximately, yes.
Because they thought that would be a better way of looking at it. So I like the idea of having each council member to pick up one person. I do not want to see two design review boards. The reason being is if this design review board will review my project, still I have the same problem if they don't have the quorum. I have to wait until they come back and have the quorum. So that's why, personally myself, I rather see one design review board with alternates, which they're gonna sit for the person who is absent. So this way, design review board meeting will be held all the time. And I wanted to see the original, at least 3 of original members to be present to have the alternate. I mean, that can be think of again. But however, I like the idea of one design review board, but each council members to appoint one alternate for those design review board members.
So option one,
Option 1, yes.
with a requirement of a quorum of 3 original board members.
That would be original members at least to be present. I don't know if that's workable or not.
If we did that, essentially, we would still be in the same position that we're in now if we were to
That's
require
fine.
3.
Because I think, yeah, we're looking at this for lack of quorum,
Yes.
as a result of frequent lacks of quorum.
All right, without 3 members present is still fine. The original members, if they are not there, it's fine with me.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions, comments?
Well, with regard to that, I'm okay with number 1. I think we'll see how that works, and we'll hopefully have the consistency that staff is looking for on the review of our design review applications. So I'm okay with option number 1 as well.
Questions or comments?
Okay, all right, so you are going for 5 alternates?
Both of them
Is
are
that-
for option
okay.
1.
That was actually my opinion as well. I thought that it would be good to have that many, just in case, some of the 5 alternates aren't available. You still have kind of a good number. Thank you for this report. I think it's a really good one. The improvements, I think, were needed. The Design Review Board is a very important board. And so I think any kind of improvements that we can make, and of course, being assured that they will be able to meet on a consistent basis. I was shocked at that graph that you showed of the absences. That was incredible. How many no-shows were accounted for. That's absolutely, I think, as far as if you're appointed to a commission, your obligation is to show up for those meetings, and especially the Design Review Board. That is so important. There are a lot of things that I like about this. It's hopefully eliminating confusion, which is one of your main goals. Organization is there, consistency is there, everything is faster, so that is a big improvement. And the improved submittal packages, I think that is really amazing, because I remember back when we had personally had a submittal to DRB. And, you know, you see a lot of architects and developers go in and they have to go back a second time, a third time. Our architect was very prepared, had every question, his submittal was absolutely perfect, and we just, you know, flew through. So I know that if your submittal package is good, if you're prepared for that meeting, you can get through design review board and not have to repeat 2 or 3 times. Should downtown projects be subject to design review board? Absolutely. I think that they are our experts. I think especially with your new philosophy and standards and the DSP specific plan update, I think they are the ones that should be looking at that first, and then it can come to us. About the design review board, I've already said that I think that, you know, to have five board members, I just felt there would be a problem if you had to, because then you'd get down to how do we select the 2 council members that would first elect or submit alternates, and it would just become, I think, too complicated and not a good thing. So I think those are all my comments. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Devine. Councilmember Garpetian.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have some comments to make and maybe a couple of questions. And I look at this in a kind of in a different lens, if you will, as a global issue that we have. I'm going to share a few things that I hear almost every day out there about getting in front of design review board, the time it takes, the issues they have because of us not having enough planners, basically, because we know we are shorthanded. And the turnaround time, sometimes they say the planner has 30 days to, you know, complete the review and make comments. They wait until the 30th day and send the comment out. The corrections or revisions has to be in writing, so they would know, people would know what they're facing, because they say we make the corrections, we come back, they give us new corrections. I understand sometimes they don't make enough corrections, they bring it back and they bring new documents in and they get corrections based on what they proposed, newly proposed. But overall, I think everything has to be in writing, and we're not reinventing the wheel. This is not rocket science. I mean, we just, there's a process they have to follow, submit plans that are completed. And when they're completed, sometimes they can't even get in on design review board in 2 months after that, when it's deemed complete, or 3 months after that. So these are the things we need to look into. I think 150 days is a long time to get in front of a design review board, because I think it's longer than that. The 150 days is an average of the timing that we get in front of design review board. And the other issue is the staff we need to, as you mentioned in your report, we need to train our staff to make decisions. Because when there's 1 or 2 decision maker and that person is not in town for 3 weeks, everything stops, and that is not right. That is not right. As far as, I think some of the issues that are here, we already voted on. This DSP projects going to DRB, didn't we vote on that and said, no, it has to come to council? And it's again here, and I don't know why. I don't mind it if it goes to DRB, but on one hand, we say DRB is really overloaded, and then we want to put the DSP projects on top of that. How are they going to handle it? I don't know. If they can handle it, fine, but I don't think, I personally don't want it to go to DRB. It has to come to here. We have more time. Our meetings are different than theirs. They have few cases every time. We have only one, maybe one. And there's not many projects right now anyways, as far as the DSP goes. When you send the DSP projects to the DRB, it's going to take a long time. You do the same thing over and over again. You have to prepare the same staff report for them, the noticing, and then bring it back here. I'm not for that.
Do you mind if I take 1 minute and just survey the council about whether DSP should go to DRB or not?
My vote is for it to come to
Yours
council.
is, yours is clear.
We voted on that
Senator,
before.
Do you mind if I ask you that?
Let me pass and hear from my colleagues as I think about that.
Well, I know your opinion as well.
I thought I don't know when this was, that we reviewed it and we said we don't want to change it, but if there's
Right.
any issue that
I do remember
brings
that
the-
conversation.
So,
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know why they're reviewing it again.
Okay, so you want it to remain as is, which is
Wouldn't mind
DSP
even
not
we
to be
change it,
subject to
but I
DRB.
don't want to do something twice when it came to us and we
No.
spoke about it.
yeah, we voted on this item that the DSP projects not go to the DRB.
Not be subject to
Come
DRB.
Straight to
council.
us.
Now it's here.
I just want to make sure, I mean, no vote was taken, we received feedback from the council based on what Mr. Garapetian is saying in terms of those projects coming to the city council and not the DRB. However, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Calvert, I believe we said that we would bring the totality of all of those pieces back today for the council to ultimately vote on it today.
not
So a
correct.
vote, I don't believe, and I could be wrong, Mr. Garapetian, I don't think a vote was taken, but Bradley, you can correct me if I'm
No, that's
mistaken.
Yeah, we
not a
didn't take
problem.
it.
I mean, my understanding was that we said we wanted to come back to camp, but it's nonetheless, it's
And then a vote would be
That's why I
taken
wanted to
today.
clarify that.
Yeah,
That's exactly why, so there's no ambiguity, no confusion on anyone's part, yes.
And we are complaining that design review board is having problem and it takes such a long time until they get to a project. And now we want to add to it. That's what I don't mind that much whether they have to review, but if you don't have enough people to go through these issues, now you are putting more load on them, then what's going to happen? That's what
and
I'm-
also staff time. If I may finish my comments.
And let me ask Mr. Najarian, he never answered
So,
that, so.
So with those comments, I think I'd rather have these DSP submissions come directly to council rather than take that extra layer through the DRB.
And I'm in agreement for the reasons that have been stated. It seems like DRB is overloaded. We're trying to mitigate that problem currently. So under those circumstances, for us to consider unloading the DSP projects on them doesn't make sense.
And ultimately, these are the most standout projects, the most visible.
High profile.
And I think council needs to take strong ownership of that one way or the other in our discussion and our submissions.
My only comment is, all of the buildings in the DSP right now were approved only by council and not by design review board.
Right.
Am I correct?
Yeah, they were.
But they didn't go down without a fight. I mean, there was robust discussion through all of that.
So I think there's clarity on this issue, Mr. Garpetian.
Thank you. If I may continue. Also, all of the standards that we're, as far as the applications go, I think DSP should have a different set of standards because there are much larger projects, much detailed projects, much complicated projects than single family. I just want to keep banging on that, beating that drum that you cannot expect the same thing that we expect from DSP, from the single family one room addition or even a brand new single family house or 4 units or 10. It has to be 2 sets of standards. Many of the people who own a property and they want to rebuild it, they don't have that access to resources to bring the 3D dimension, 3D systems that we were talking about to provide that kind of a plan. I'm not saying not to provide sufficient plans, but I just don't want to mix the two together because the standards are different as well. And the code is different for both of them. The zoning is different.
We plan on tailoring those for each individual
I
project.
appreciate that. And I want to give it to our planners. They do a God's job in here, and it's not easy to deal with people day in, day out, and I've been there in even the building department and the planning department. Everybody comes in and they want things done today. I understand we are short-staffed, we are short-handed. If we need to hire more people to get things done, our city manager is here, we have to look into that. And also, I want to talk about DRB and the members, because I don't want them to get a bad rap overall. The absences that, I went back and spent some time today and checked every meeting in 2018, the minutes that indicated who was absent, who was not absent. I'm not going to bring any names, but 3 of the board members, they missed 4 meetings during the year. Not consecutive absences, but 3 of them missed 4. 1 missed 7, and 1 missed 6. The one who missed 6 is not with the board anymore. So altogether, they missed 25 meetings between the 5 of them. And as far as the quorum goes, there was 2 meetings that was canceled because of lack of quorum, but we also had 2 special meetings that they participated. So that made up for the meetings that they didn't have quorum for. So, and we also had cancellations because of Thanksgiving, because of Christmas, and there's 1 cancellation on September 27th, and there was no reason for it. I don't know why it was canceled. So the 2 meetings that was canceled due to lack of quorum, we had a special meeting set, and they participated. So total, we had 20 meetings in 2018 of design review, and they reviewed 65 cases in 20 meetings. So it's like 3 or 3.5 cases, if you will, or 4 cases per meeting. Just because maybe they could have, some meetings were 5 or 6, the others were 2, and I wrote them all down. I mean, most of them are 2 or 3, there are some 4, and there are some 5 cases that they reviewed every time they met. As far as the board members and the alternates, when I was on the board, we had 2 boards, and we met again every other week. Every board had a meeting once a month. So it was easier to attend every meeting. And the other issue is some of the board members, because the first rule to become or the criteria to become a commissioner is you have to be a Glendale resident, registered voter, and we require to have an architect, and some of them are in the business, they're designers, they're architects, we have, I think, landscape architects, so they're in the business, and they live in this city, they work in this city. Sometimes they have a project that comes before the very board that they sit on, but they have to recuse themselves. And it creates a kind of an awkward position for the rest of the board members, and I don't blame them because they live in the city, that's their business, that's their job, they have projects. So when we had 2 boards, if one of the board members had a project, it would go to the other board. The project wouldn't come to the same board and have that board member recuse himself or herself. It would go to the second board, and the other board is totally a different body. It's not that you sit in the same board with your colleagues all the time, then once or twice a year or 3 times a year, whatever the number is, you have projects. I think if you want to have alternates, maybe we should look into having 2 boards so the number of meetings will be the same. It won't put any more pressure on staff, but as far as attending meetings, instead of twice a month, you only attend once a month. And that's why maybe you may still have some quorum problems once in a while, but I think 2 boards is the way to go. And instead of having, and with these members missing 4 for each, maybe that will go down too, because they will have only 1 meeting a year. So I was going to say, And you mentioned lack of standards with teeth. I want to understand what that means on your presentation.
Similar to what we looked at with the DSP, that we had some guidelines in there, but there was also a lot of ambiguity. And there are certain things in going back to creating, or you were referencing, how much we expect from the different kind of applications. They're not all the same scale, same size. We wouldn't be asking for the same information that we would on a downtown project as a single-family addition or a single-family home itself. That would be scaled. But there are certain components, certain design elements that we know we could apply a standard of compatibility to. Something that speaks to the aesthetic, the vernacular of the neighborhood, and trying to define what that is. We don't have that right now, but creating that ultimately.
Okay. And going through this presentation, none of the board members missed 3 consecutive meetings, with the exception of one. None of them, the rest of them didn't miss 75% of the meetings. And as far as consistency, when you have board members changing all the time, I think it's your alternate sitting in instead of the board member. I think that will create more inconsistency than. So, and I wanted to ask you about this page that you mentioned, design standards and pattern book. This is from where? Louisiana? No.
One of those is just, the image to the right side is just kind of a matrix of potential styles. One of them that we referenced was the Louisiana pattern book. These are common for a lot of cities, a lot of neighborhoods, and this goes back to where we were trying to define compatibility, the important design features of certain styles, certain neighborhoods.
Okay. Okay. That's where I understand.
I understand. So you're not for any of the options, clearly.
No, I think instead of having an alternate, because right now they're missing, the biggest problem is lack of quorum. And we had 2 meetings that was canceled because of lack of quorum. And we had special meetings that I think they made that up. So, but overall, if that's the concern, having 2 boards, I don't think instead of having 5 alternates that they may be discouraged, having 2 boards, and these 2 boards can meet once a month, and you still have 2 meetings a month, and it will give them more reason to attend than not.
Can I ask a question that follow up to Councilmember? How would, if we did have those 2 boards, if we're voting to each of us to have an alternate, and so that would be 5, and so we could have 2 boards, but what about interchanging the board members? If one design review board meeting, there were only 3 that were available that particular night, we could take 2 from the other board and substitute them, put them in as alternate, and vice versa. That way we could eliminate, we would have.
So you will have 5 members.
Would have 2 boards.
I don't know, that's something
Yeah.
that they have to,
Yeah.
I don't know if it's.
What are the pros and cons of doing something like that?
I mean, the whole point of having the board and then the alternates is to have individuals sort of prepared and ready to replace
Right.
the original board, so to say. Having a second board has a different function. It's to make sure that the backlog's not there.
Correct.
They would have their own dedicated caseload. They would have their own cases that they would, in the long term, kind of study and be ready to discuss and analyze and vote on.
Right.
So I'm not sure mixing the 2 boards, I think it kind of mixes 2 different purposes.
Well, that's my question. What are the pros and cons of that? Would it be an overload, or would they be able to, function as a substitute?
I think the biggest issue with the two boards is a consistency one, is that you then have two different boards who may review essentially in two different ways, two different sets of opinions. The idea of having those alternates be able to step in when we do have a lack of quorum. And correct, there have only been 2 meetings canceled, which isn't too big of an issue. The real challenge is, though, is that either way that meeting had to be canceled, and that just pushes everybody back. So maybe we made it up on a special meeting at a later date, but it did push everyone's timeline out because we did have to reschedule or move those cases to another date. So the idea of, if we really want to maintain consistency, is to have them be able to step in on that one board, that one group that meets however frequent we need them to, so that the reviews.
But how can you have consistency? Because if you have, basically, for every position, you have 2 board members. One is a board member, the other one is an alternate. If I'm the alternate, I may not follow exactly what the board member was doing. I have my own mind, my own, way of reviewing issues. The consistency, just having 2 boards or having 1 board with alternates, the consistency will vary. It's not that it is going to be all the same. Then you don't even want that. When you say consistency, you want to have that discussion. You want to have the differences of the opinion. Consistency doesn't mean that they all have to vote at the same way. And with having a board member that is kind of, because it takes time to get the hang of it, basically. It takes 6 months or sometimes over a year to learn the code, to do what you have to do. And if you're an alternate and you're not that involved, you're going to only attend 4 meetings because your board member is missing only 4 meetings a year, then I don't know how consistent the projects will be.
And that's where the recommendation for 2 alternates came from, was to maintain that consistency, so the alternates would kind of continuously flow in and out as need be. You're right, it's never going to be 100%. If someone's missing a meeting, that's going to throw it off, but it's trying to keep it as consistent as possible is the ultimate goal.
Yes, Mr. Rajani?
I'm looking at this issue from what they call client or our citizens, our people who live in this city and they bring their project for review. We have to look from their angle. And from their angle, they want, when they have the project, and we said this will be reviewed, let's say on April 21st, we want to assure them that this will happen. I mean, if we are looking from their angle, so the best is that 5 people to be present at the time when that meeting should be held. So that, not from our angle or commissioners or others. These are our clients, these are our citizens of Glendale who came forward, elected us. So we have to make it easier for them. And easier for them means that when they bring the project, they want to see somebody will look at it. They don't care this group are different than the other group or whatever. They want to be 5 people to be present to review their project. So that's why I think if we have 5 people and alternate, we are assuring them, who are our clients, or they are our boss actually, that you have project, we will give you a date, and we'll review the project. We are looking at what has been presented a little bit earlier. The person comes forward. It will take 5 to 7 months, right, until we review their project, going through DRB, go through the city staff, DRB, and how long will it take?
We're averaging 5, just under 5 months right now.
5?
Just under 5 months is the average right now.
So if DRB is not ready to review it, then will be what? 6, 7 months?
It would depend on the caseload, how many design reviews are scheduled. But right now, we are holding an average just under 5 months.
Okay, still, they want to, their project, they spend money, they buy the land, mostly, or they have to wait for it. So I think we have to look at from their angle, and we have to solve this problem as fast as possible. That's why I am offering one design review board and each member to have alternate. Thank you.
Mr. Agajanian, having an alternate doesn't make any difference. on the scheduling. When your application is deemed complete, it takes at least a good 3 months, maybe 4 months, for your application to be deemed complete, and then they will schedule it for design review board.
And they're
So-
absent.
No, they're not absent. What I'm saying is, at that time, if you are, because you need 21 days in advance notice to send notices, you need at least a month. So when your application is deemed complete, you're not going to get a design review. Chances of you getting a design review hearing next month is very slim. It's going to be another 2 months, or maybe 3 months after that. But having an alternate is not going to make any difference on what happens before the hearing. I understand if the hearing is, they don't have a quorum, it's canceled, of course, everything gets pushed back. But even if they have a quorum, it doesn't mean that it's going to expedite your process. So having an alternate is a good thing, and to me, having 2 boards is a better thing. But it may not even. It doesn't make any difference on how you get scheduled and that's the biggest problem that people have. It's not that 1 meeting was canceled or 2 meetings was canceled. Yes, they get upset, and you have, special meetings for that. But by the time they get to that date of the design review, that's the challenge right now for people. Not having a quorum on the board. The challenge is, they say it takes 4 to 6 months for me to get this thing put together. Most of them, they have, it's their fault too. They're not doing they don't submit an application that's complete. But the challenge is we are shorthanded, and things get backed up, especially when the decision makers are very few. I think that's the biggest issue right now.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to say that the argument that I'm hearing about having 2 different boards is consistency in decision-making, but aren't the standards, and both boards would be making their decisions based on the same standards?
As they should, yes, but we do know that may not always happen. We've had experience with 2 prior boards before, and you would have applicants that would have a preference to go to one board or over the other, and that's the kind of thing that we want to avoid. Maybe we could still achieve that with 2 boards, not ruling out that possibility, but the goal of a lot of this is to reduce those opportunities where those things can go wrong, where those things add time, and speaking of essentially the public-facing element, and with the public, is we want them to be able to walk in the door and know exactly what to expect. And that's why that's what a lot of this is focused on. And the same thing, if we do maintain that 1 board, is that they know exactly what to expect from that board because they've seen it, or maybe they've gone through it already before.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I just want to mention that those days are, I know, but this is an important issue. But the days that the people will walk in and say, I don't want to go to this board, I want to go to the other board, is over. Because those days, I remember those days. Huh?
There's only 1 board now.
No, I know.
Before.
But before, even if you have 2 boards, the board members, I remember the way they were behaving on the they would get a red pen and mark all over your plans. I say, I don't like this, and physically throw it on the table. So those days are gone. So right now we have professionals, we have people who care. They're on the boards, all of our board members. But I don't think if you have 2 boards, there's going to be like, I want to go to this board or to the other board. But
It's definitely going to happen. You have 2 boards, it's impossible to control. If I come forward, I say I want this one or that one because I heard something or I know better, somebody in there. However, thank you.
Thank you. So thank you to all my colleagues for those thoughtful comments. Mr. Calvert, I want to commend you on yet another deep, insightful, thorough report. I know this whole process with the DSP changes has been very tedious, but you've done an outstanding job. And it's hard for us to sort of always get everything that we think is right for our residents. We all try, but sometimes we have converging views. I think you've done a great job in showing us the right path. So I'll just comment on some of the key points that were raised by my colleagues. I understand this DRB consistency, timeliness issue. I think fundamental issue is to make sure that our residents, our clients, because some of the people who go through the process obviously aren't residents, but the clients are well served and in a reasonable manner, in a timely manner, and to eliminate any sort of subjective impediments to this process moving forward fast. I know that my colleague, Councilor Garpetian, alluded to the fact that sometimes a key decision maker is out on vacation and all of a sudden the whole process comes to a halt. I've heard that complaint numerously during the last 12-month period, that one individual was out, and because of that, everyone was at the whim of this individual. That's unacceptable. We're a public entity. We're here to serve the interests of the public. So that needs to be eliminated. That has to be gone. So that has nothing to do really with the design review board structure, but more with the process. So that's on staff, and I think we need to be very consistent on that issue, make sure that that's never an impediment to things moving forward fast. DRB alternates, so 2 alternates versus 5 alternates. I understand the merit in having 2 alternates, sort of really part of that board, right? They become part of the board because then it would be easy to expect them to always be there, watch the deliberations. Whenever someone's out, they step in. Doesn't matter who's out, they step in. They kind of start, whether they like it or not, they start jiving with the rest of the board, versus a 5-person alternate group, which I guess everyone would be matched against their council members' initial appointee. So that's a totally different dynamic, and it's going to be hard to expect them to show up there. But I think we all agree that, well, no, 4 of us agree that to designate 2 people to be alternates to the DRB is going to be a little touchy. It's going to be a little difficult. So to avoid that may become more of a problem than the DRB process itself. So let's avoid that. And 5 direct appointees by council. In terms of the alternate, the second DRB, I like the analysis that Councilmember Garpetian did in terms of saying that, listen, they only missed 2 meetings and there were 2 special meetings, so they made up for it. Yet the workload's still there, the backlog is still there. So having 2 DRBs, each meeting only once a month, wouldn't really relieve that pressure, because then you still have the 20 meetings a year. But I guess with less pressure on the individual DRB members, they would be more consistent in coming to the meetings, I assume. Maybe that's the benefit. But again, I just don't see how having the same amount of meetings by 2 different boards, at the end of the day, a total of 20 meetings, is going to fast track the DRB backlog. So I support the first alternative, but with an open mind to look at this in 6 months or so, or a year, to see how this is going. If the backlog's still there and it's getting worse, I think we got to look at the alternatives, like a second DRB board. But for now, let's go with option 1, or at least that's what I support, and we'll put it up for a vote and we'll see what happens.
Just a quick comment that having 1 board or 2 boards or 1 board with alternatives has nothing to do with the backlog. The backlog is there because we cannot process these applications fast.
So it's a procedural staff issue.
It is a because we're shorthanded. And as I mentioned, we had 65 cases reviewed in 20 meetings. So they can review more if there are more cases before them. But the backlog has nothing to do with the number of meetings, has nothing to do with losing 1 or 2 meetings because of the lack of quorum, because they made up for it. But the backlog is there because we can't process it faster.
But that also means that then there's no problem to be fixed. We don't need to touch the DRB structure as it is now, because that has nothing to do with the backlog. I'm not sure that's entirely true. If that's the case, then why are we voting on this? Why are we?
That's
if I have
exactly my
stuff-
point.
I mean, that's again.
I mean,
that's
I'm
difference of
okay with
perspective.
having an alternate and see how does it work, but if the board member shows up every time, and that will make the board members to show up, I promise
for
you
sure
that.
they will, yeah.
That they will
I
show up
agree.
to their meetings, and you know, the alternates will get, you know, but that's fine. I'm okay with option one as well. I'm willing to go along and, you know, I always believe that having two boards is a great thing, but we'll decide.
revisit
Yeah,
the issue,
we'll
and
revisit the
see how
issue
things
some
are going.
year later, and a year later.
We can return with the status report.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you very much.
We would ask the council begin to identify and nominate those alternates as well, so that we could begin to put that in place.
Very well. So I'm going to call a roll for this.
Councilmember
Oh,
Agajanian.
I'm sorry. We need to have someone move the
So
item.
we're voting on option one, which
Option-
is.
I move the item.
So,
is it-
move option one.
Is it a motion for all the items and with option one on the DRB alternates?
No, what are the other items? I want to understand that.
What-
There's one motion, and it is for the process, in making the improvements to the process as described in the staff report as presented by Mr. Calvert. And then the second part of this motion is just as further directed pursuant to which option is selected by the board, so.
So I select, if I select option one, and
With the rest of the report.
with the rest of the report, yeah.
Second.
May we have the roll call, please?
Councilmember Agajanian.
Yes.
Devine.
Yes.
Garpetian.
Yes.
Najarian.
Yes.
Mayor Sinanian.
Yes. So thank you very much. Tim. And anything else on the agenda?
Adjournment.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
And we're adjourned at 4:27 PM.